Dragon's Dogma is one of the most ambitious dark fantasy action role-playing games I've ever played, combining some of the best elements of its contemporaries into an experience that, somehow, didn't land. While its sequel, which I intend to play next, has solidified that it's not forgotten in gaming's collective memory, I still believe the original has never been properly recognized for its virtues, and I want to outline, through the flaws, exactly what I think those are. The open world of Dragon's Dogma is one of its most remarkable characters. Smaller than it appears at first, it is designed to be traversed without the use of fast travel, with roads, trails, and points of interest that become familiar over time. This is, of course, a dual-edged sword. Enemies that respawn along those paths respawn regularly and do not change, and this erodes at the otherwise living, breathing quality. It's also experientially frustrating to spend a large chunk of traversal watching your character heave out of breath as they recover stamina, and the time involved in traveling interacts poorly with some other systems present in the game. There was initially an attempt to limit fast travel to the use of a consumable resource called fairy stones, which was ultimately abandoned with the implementation of a non-consumable version. This would at first seem like an admission of failure, except the fast travel still remains more limited, and the world design still facilitates its absence. The result is a more immersive open world than many more modern games of substantially larger scale, setting a perfect framework for the threats you'll face within it. Dragon's Dogma makes a promise to the player that the combat will be fucking hype. It delivers on that promise. The basic enemies can become familiar over time, as there are only a small handful which get modified as the game progresses to keep the challenge increasing. But the bosses, the centerpieces of the combat, are fucking exhilarating. Putting to shame most other David vs. Goliath fantasy combat games, notable exceptions, Dragon's Dogma lets the player climb the bosses to target their weak spots. A Cyclops' eyes, a dragon's heart, a griffin's wing, or a hydra's neck. It's not perfect, but it's a system that engages the player in the kinds of fights that have, prior to this, been reserved almost exclusively for pre-rendered cutscenes, quick-time events, or ineffectually attacking at the ankles of an enemy that barely fits in camera. The classes themselves are each custom designed and make excellent use of animation and sound design in their abilities, pulling the player in, close to the combat, which feels immensely impactful. Not necessarily weighty or realistic. The goal is cinematic combat, dramatic fights that feel at times like an exercise in action movie style, and at others like a desperate scrap for survival. The player's 9 classes can each learn active and passive abilities. Up to 3 active abilities can be equipped per weapon, of which most classes can equip 2. In this system, there is no mechanical distinction between a magic user's spells and a non-magic user's abilities. I think that's cool. Because a player can know more abilities than they'll ever be able to equip, there winds up being a greater deal of build variety than even the 9 classes would suggest, even within a single class. You also have full control over the gear and skills of your main companion, further extending the variety by an entire additional character. It's impressive to deliver a stylish, cinematic combat experience, and more impressive to make one that can be tuned so well to each individual. More impressive still is how much Dragon's Dogma commits to carrying that philosophy through all other aspects of itself. The character creator of Dragon's Dogma is more in-depth than most I've seen, not because it gives you the most granular control over how your face looks, it doesn't, but because it lets you make a greater variety of characters, from tiny old ladies to Shrek-sized and shaped fellas. This is just really fucking cool. Controlling the proportions of your arms and legs may seem inconsequential to some, but if the goal of a character creator is personal expression, then I truly believe that much is lost when those creators restrict what you can create because of choices like gender, which Dragon's Dogma doesn't, or by not having enough choices, like skin color or hairstyle, which Dragon's Dogma does. On top of that, your choices in character do not affect the story or gameplay, save for the bandits that will attack you if you have any male party members, which is mostly just really funny. That particular challenge can be circumvented by equipping women's clothes. Disguises are used once elsewhere, according to the logic of the world, but otherwise the armor and clothing systems are mainly aesthetic systems. Don't ever let anyone tell you that dark fantasy action hero Barbie isn't one of the best minigames of the genre, and Fashion's Dogma deserves a seat among the pantheon of the greats. The player chooses both their clothing, which layers under their armor, and the armor itself, paired up along with a cloak, headpiece, gloves, and boots, some of which are class-specific, and you have a really robust suite of fashion choices to create a wide range of aesthetics. The warrior can present as a nomadic tribesman, an armored infantry, or an occult warrior. Striders can dress as shadowy cutthroats, cunning travelers, or boisterous thrill-seekers. Mages? Honestly, mages get the short straw, with most choices being different robes, but there's still options. The chances that you can't pull a look together that you like are low, and if that isn't important to you, get better taste. That's fine because it's not necessary to optimize for fashion. In fact, it's actively detrimental. But the point is merely to demonstrate that Dragon's Dogma values highly the player's individual preferences, and even at times the player's choices. Writing is always going to come down to individual taste, so I'm not going to make the argument that Dragon's Dogma's was especially good, only better than most gave it credit for. Not solely carried by Grigori's phenomenal voice acting, though its effect cannot be understated.
Only my death will staunch the flood of destruction, a task still far beyond your means. I ask again, what is your purpose here, Arisen? One path to your survival lies in my defeat. Still my heart, and you stay the coming end. Reclaim that you have lost. Take back your life, the surge of blood that takes you to this world. It awaits you, Arisen, yearning here within you.
Instead, I want to argue that Dragon's Dogma had good narrative systems and utilized them well to tell an on-paper story that wound up as less than the sum of its parts. The game was neatly separated into main quests and side quests, as many role-playing games are. The main quest was separated into different stages, upon completion of which the world would advance in time, and some quests you completed would progress into their next stage, with characters moving locations or becoming unavailable as the quest givers moved on, or succumbed to the threats facing them. Quests having fail states can be frustrating, and it certainly is in Dragon's Dogma, but unlike the lineage of Elden Ring, it does a decent enough job of telegraphing when those fail states will occur, mostly. When done well, it gives a sense that the world is alive, that it reacts to your choices and presence, and encourages you to immerse yourself in the space and logic of the setting. A quest given by a defensive keep to ask the Duke for reinforcements has a different outcome depending upon whether you give the request to a guard captain and trust him to send it up the chain of command, or personally bring it to the Duke himself. An NPC you helped find a spell tome will later appear, using it to help you fight a griffin, where he otherwise wouldn't if ignored. Characters whose quests you missed may become unavailable, or those you complete may progress, opening up new quests related to them. A quest to care for a noble's child tracks whether you run into her during the walk or take too long fulfilling her demands. A quest to retake a fortress overrun by goblins will fail if its commander dies in the fighting. Once you find a lost precious artifact, instead of turning it to the Duke, you can give him a forgery, allowing you to keep its power for yourself. An endgame quest involves the dragon kidnapping an NPC that the game has designated your beloved. The beloved is chosen through an affinity system wherein an NPC's feelings toward the player can be improved by completing quests related to them or gifting them items. It's likely that the beloved will be one of a handful of NPCs, but it's technically possible for them to be any NPC. The dragon gives you a choice. You can leave them to the dragon, and the dragon will leave, letting the world believe you slew it without endangering yourself, or you can fight the dragon to win their life. You can choose to fight the dragon by answering his question, or by simply attacking him with a spell or arrow. During another quest, you are presented with a choice to interfere or not with another character's honor duel. You may watch as she duels, and you can choose to attack her opponent if you want to disregard her wishes and secure his death. Dragon's Dogma consistently attempts to give the player choices that they can make with its mechanics. It tries to invite the player to think about the setting as their character would, to grant them the same tools. And on subsequent playthroughs, as you retain items, knowledge, and levels from prior cycles, you can even skip entire sections, such as by killing the griffin before it can flee to a tower, or turning in the ring from your last playthrough while doing none of the investigative work. These sequence breaks are, to some extent, bizarrely justified by the narrative. A narrative that's invested in concepts of free will, power, and justice. Dragon's Dogma reinterprets the tropes of the archetypal Dragon Slayer story, a wise king, a princess trapped in a tower, and monsters terrorizing the land, as metaphysical constants that are each not as their tropes would suggest, and tries so very hard to make a world that's alive. NPCs each have their own names and comment on the state of the world when prompted, its political turmoil. Citizens in the city comment on the struggles of poverty, while politicians worry about how to feed the populace, and soldiers in far-off keeps desperately need supplies and reinforcements. Not all of this dialogue is inconsequential vocal barks. Sometimes NPCs will hint you towards points or characters of interest, though it is uncommon. And though there's no quest associated with it, the foraging and combining systems are another attempt to add texture to the world that is relevant to gameplay, as you learn where in Grancis certain alchemic materials can be found and what beneficial concoctions they make. As the story nears its end, it ponders, among other things, how alive a world can be if it only exists when you choose to allow it to. And the meta-knowledge this bestows the player character with creates genuine moral dilemmas that have stuck in my mind since I first experienced them. Like whether to use your knowledge of the ever-turning wheel when you choose to evict this family at the behest of some slumlord, an action the game frames as evil, but also one that, due to unrelated circumstances, saves their lives. There's no cause and effect, you simply possess a level of knowledge that you can no longer ignore, separating you, the Arisen, from the perspectives of mortals without granting you the power to rewrite the choices you're given like a god. I don't want to overstate how good I think the story truly is, but I do feel it necessary to assert. It's not something you should simply dismiss from the game if you can overlook the erratic quality of the script and voice acting. There are compelling characters and plots here. Which is true of all aspects of this game. But I also understand why it is that some can't overlook its flaws. This is a grinding heavy game. The promise of compelling combat it makes is simultaneously upheld and rendered obsolete by its progression systems. Players accumulate stats as they level through 200 levels, and no aspect of the world increases in power with them. Healing items, which restored half your health in the beginning, restore a sliver at the endgame. Enemies that were desperate fights are barely reduced to an annoyance. However, methods of increasing power exist long past the point of trivializing the game. All classes are equally viable because all classes are overpowered. The challenge that remains is relegated exclusively to the expansion area, Bitter Black Isle, where the use of the right consumable items can still bury it. Truth be told, I don't hate this. It gives the player the ability to make the game easier or harder at their own discretion. The regular use of consumable items, however, exposes Dragon's Dogma's other main flaw. The gameplay is being interrupted constantly. Towards the endgame, and most challenging enemies, the main way difficulty is presented is through extremely punishing amounts of damage, requiring you to heal after making any mistake. Healing involves opening the menu, pausing the game, and using your healing items en masse. You can also carry items called Wake Stones, which can resurrect you when you die, and Stamina Restoratives, which can let you keep up your aggression, as well as a small arsenal of tools which can modify combat, such as letting melee classes have small single-use spells or apply status effects to enemies. This emphasis on preparation is a staple of the dungeon diving genre, but its implementation in Dragon's Dogma directly conflicts with and undermines the emphasis on frenetic combat. Players will spend an enormous amount of time moving items between their party to manage weight, withdrawing items from storage, which is a different menu from depositing items to storage, which are both different menus from equipping different items as they change vocation, or learning, or changing the equipped skills of their vocation, or entering the rift to rehire pawns that they lost on their last expedition and then equipping them with all of the items that they were previously carrying. Even something as simple as drying off the lantern when you get soaked so it will cast light again involves opening the menu twice and waiting for 2 animations to complete. While this is perhaps not the reason most people recoiled from the game, I believe it does pair well with the poorly implemented fast travel, damage and defense scalings, and writing and delivery failing to sell players on the depths of its story to convey the issue that Dragon's Dogma doesn't always seem to respect your time. Personally, I think that's true. But Dragon's Dogma also features a combat system tackling the hardest challenges that all entries in its genre face, a level of personalization that places the player's aesthetic and gameplay preferences front and center, a world that consistently attempts to draw the player into itself through its mechanics, and a story compelling enough to leave an impression far greater than its script would suggest. This is what I mean when I say ambition, and why I find Dragon's Dogma's middling success far, far more impressive and creatively inspiring than a great many of its contemporaries. Thanks for watching.